My husband of 5 years was just convicted of rape for something that happened 2 years ago. I had no idea until the verdict, and when I confronted him, he called it a misunderstanding and begged me to stand by him. Hello, Reddit. I never expected to find myself in this situation, but here I am, trying to make sense of a reality I never saw coming. My name is Your Name, and for the past 5 years, I have been married to a man I believed was my partner, my best friend, and the person I could trust above all else. We built a life together, a home, routines, plans for the future. To me, he was loving, responsible, and kind. I thought I knew him better than anyone. But I was wrong. A few weeks ago, my entire world came crashing down in a way I never could have imagined. My husband was convicted of rape, an assault that happened 2 years ago. Until that moment, I had absolutely no idea. No clue. Nothing in our life had ever hinted at this dark, horrifying secret. The first time I heard about the crime was in the same breath that I learned he had been found guilty. From the moment we met, my husband, let's call him Daniel, was everything I had ever wanted in a partner. He was charming, thoughtful, and had this quiet confidence that made me feel safe. We had a whirlwind romance, but it never felt rushed. Every step with him felt natural, like we were always meant to end up together. He was the type of man who left sweet notes on the fridge, who made me coffee in the morning, and who held my hand when we walked down the street. My friends loved him, my family adored him, and I felt so incredibly lucky to have him by my side. Of course, no marriage is perfect, but our problems were nothing out of the ordinary. Work stress, small disagreements, the usual. Looking back, there was never a moment that made me question who he really was. 2 years ago, the time when the assault happened, I can't recall anything unusual about Daniel. If I go back and try to piece things together, all I remember is us going about our normal lives. We were living in the same apartment, making dinner together, watching our favorite shows at night. There were no late-night disappearances, no odd behavior, no signs that the man I loved had done something so horrific. Even now, it makes my stomach turn to think about it. Was I blind? Was I stupid? How could I have shared my life, my bed, my love with someone who was capable of this? I've replayed every conversation, every moment from those years, desperately searching for something, anything, that would have given me a clue. But there's nothing. Fast forward to a few weeks ago. My husband had been acting stressed, but I assumed it was just work or general life pressure. He never once mentioned that he was under investigation, never once hinted that something was wrong. Then, completely out of the blue, I received a phone call that shattered my reality. It was his mother. Her voice was shaking, and she asked me if I was sitting down. Daniel was just convicted, she said. I felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. Convicted of what? I asked, my mind racing. I thought maybe it was fraud, theft, something serious but fixable. Something that could be explained. But when she said the word rape, my entire body went cold. I couldn't process it. I remember gripping the edge of the table, staring at the floor as her words blurred together. A trial? A guilty verdict? I kept shaking my head, as if doing so would erase what she had just told me. She kept talking, but I wasn't really listening. My mind was flashing through memories of Daniel, his laugh, the way he kissed my forehead, the way he held me at night. None of it made sense. How could my husband be a rapist? How could he have done something so violent, so cruel, and then come home and pretend like nothing had happened? I hung up the phone and sat in silence, my heart pounding in my chest. I felt sick. My hands were shaking. My husband was a convicted rapist, and I had found out after he was sentenced. A few hours later, I received another call. This time, it was from Daniel himself. Babe, listen, it's not what you think. His voice was urgent, almost desperate. This is all a misunderstanding. I didn't do what they're saying I did. You have to believe me. I couldn't even respond at first. I just sat there, the phone pressed against my ear, listening to the man I had loved for years tell me that this was some kind of mistake. My mind was spinning. I finally found my voice. A misunderstanding? I repeated, my voice shaking. Daniel, you were convicted. You went through an entire trial. You never even told me. How the hell am I supposed to believe you now? He sighed heavily, as if he was exhausted by all of this. Exhausted. As if he was the victim here. It's complicated, he said. They twisted everything. She was lying. I swear to you, I didn't do it. I wanted to scream. I wanted to reach through the phone and shake him. How could he lie to me? How could he keep this from me? I didn't even know, I said, my voice breaking. I didn't even know, Daniel. How could you keep this from me? There was a long silence. Then, his voice softened. I didn't want to lose you. And with that, the first tear fell down my face. I didn't respond. I hung up the phone. I sat in that silence, in the unbearable weight of it, realizing that the life I thought I had was gone. The man I had loved was a stranger. And I had no idea what to do next. The next few days were a blur of emotions: anger, confusion, disbelief, and deep sorrow. I couldn't stop replaying the phone call with Daniel over and over in my head, trying to make sense of what he'd said. How could he lie to me? How could he have kept this from me for so long? And yet, despite everything, I couldn't shake the deep, visceral feeling of betrayal that washed over me. I spent the night staring at the ceiling, my mind racing, unable to find any peace. The bed felt cold, the space between us felt infinite. The person I had shared so many intimate moments with, the person I had believed was my rock, now felt like a ghost, a stranger. I couldn't touch him. I couldn't talk to him. The distance was unbearable. I had tried calling him several times, but he hadn't answered. I wasn't sure if he was giving me space or if he was just avoiding me. Either way, I couldn't move on. I needed answers. I needed to know how it had come to this. What was the truth? I found myself standing outside our apartment building the next day, unsure of what I was hoping for. Part of me wanted to confront him in person, to demand the answers he was refusing to give me over the phone. But another part of me was afraid of what I might find. Would I even recognize the man I had married? I didn't know what to expect when I entered the apartment. The silence was almost suffocating. Daniel was sitting on the couch, his face pale and tired. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, his eyes bloodshot and hollow. But still, he was there, and I was here, staring at him, struggling to piece everything together. He looked up when I entered, but didn't say a word. His expression was unreadable. I felt the urge to scream at him, to demand an explanation, but the words stuck in my throat. I was too numb, too overwhelmed by everything that had happened. He broke the silence first. I'm sorry, he said quietly, his voice hoarse. I know this is a lot to take in, but I need you to understand. It's not what it seems. I wasn't sure how to respond. Part of me wanted to believe him. After all, he was my husband, the man I had trusted with my heart, but the other part of me wanted to run away from him as fast as I could. This wasn't just a small misunderstanding. This was something far worse. Something that was unforgivable. I don't even know what to think anymore, I whispered, barely able to meet his eyes. You lied to me. For 2 years. You didn't even have the decency to tell me you were under investigation. I didn't want to drag you into this, he said, his voice laced with guilt. I thought if I kept it from you, it would all go away. I didn't want to ruin everything we had. I stared at him, my heart heavy with disgust. You didn't want to ruin it? I repeated, my voice rising. What about me, Daniel? What about my life? What about the truth? He didn't respond. He just sat there, looking at the floor. I could feel the weight of his guilt, but it did nothing to lessen the sting of betrayal. I stood up, pacing around the living room. You don't get it, do you? This isn't just some mistake. You've been convicted of something that'll haunt you for the rest of your life. And I had no idea. I didn't do it, he said, his voice cracking. You have to believe me. I didn't hurt her. She's lying. I stopped pacing and turned to face him. And how am I supposed to believe that? I demanded. After everything that's happened? After everything you've kept from me? He stood up suddenly, his hands trembling. Because I love you, he said desperately. You're the only thing that's kept me going. You're the only reason I'm still here. I wanted to scream, to tell him that love wasn't enough. That love didn't change the fact that he had committed an unforgivable act. But I couldn't do it. The words stuck in my throat, suffocating me. I wanted to run. I wanted to get as far away from him as possible. But deep down, I knew I wasn't ready to walk away. Not yet. The days after our conversation felt suffocating. I couldn't escape the crushing reality that Daniel, the man I married, was a convicted rapist. I didn't know who he was anymore. The man who had shared my life, my bed, my dreams. How could he have done something so vile and kept it from me for so long? I went through the motions, making meals, answering emails, but inside, I was unraveling. I couldn't think straight. Every time I looked at Daniel, I saw the man in the courtroom, his defense barely convincing. Every interaction felt like a lie. The trust we'd built together seemed shattered beyond repair. Then, my phone rang one evening. It was Daniel. I hesitated before answering, my hand shaking slightly. I didn't want to hear his voice, didn't want to hear more excuses. But I answered anyway. "Babe," he said urgently. "Listen to me. This isn't what you think. The trial, the verdict, it's all a misunderstanding. I didn't do it. I swear." I felt the anger rise inside me, threatening to spill over. "A misunderstanding?" I repeated, my voice trembling. "Daniel, you were convicted. You went through a trial without telling me. How could I believe you now?" His voice dropped to a whisper. "It's complicated. I can explain everything. She's lying. The victim has been coached. You have to trust me." Trust him? How could I after everything? The man I thought I knew had kept this horrific secret from me, and now he expected me to believe him? I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "I don't understand. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you come to me when this all started?" There was a long silence before he finally spoke, his voice quieter now, tinged with regret. "I didn't want to lose you. I thought you'd leave me. I thought I could handle it on my own." I could feel the weight of his words. I could hear the fear in his voice, but it wasn't enough. The trust that had once been so solid was now fractured irreparably. "You lied to me, Daniel," I said, my voice breaking. "For 2 years, you kept this from me. And now you want me to just trust you? Please," he pleaded. "I need you. I still love you. Please don't leave me." His words felt like a slap, but I couldn't bring myself to respond right away. I just stared at the phone, overwhelmed by the shock and disbelief. Could I just forget everything that had happened? Could I pretend it wasn't true? No. The truth was there, staring me in the face. And I couldn't ignore it anymore. "I don't know if I can," I said, the words barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way." I hung up the phone before he could say anything more. The silence in the room was suffocating. The man I had married had just turned into a stranger. The next morning, I couldn't escape the nagging feeling that I needed answers, real answers. I needed to know what had really happened, what was true, and what had been twisted in the story Daniel had fed me. I called the prosecutor's office. I needed to hear it from them, to understand the full scope of the case and the evidence. I wasn't going to live in this fog any longer. The prosecutor's voice was cold and professional when he picked up. "Mrs., your name, I understand you're seeking more information about your husband's case." "Yes," I said, taking a steadying breath. "I need to know everything. I need to understand what happened." And then, he told me. The details hit me like a punch to the gut. The victim's account. The evidence. The forensic reports. Everything Daniel had told me was a lie, an attempt to cover up the truth. His story didn't match the evidence. The physical evidence was clear, the DNA, the injuries. And the victim wasn't lying. I was paralyzed by what I was hearing. Daniel had lied about everything, from the smallest details to the most damning pieces of evidence. And I had believed him. How had I been so blind? The conversation ended, and I was left sitting in stunned silence. I wanted to scream, to confront him again, but I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't keep pretending. I stood up, numb. I didn't know what the next step was, but I knew I had to make a choice. I couldn't keep living in this nightmare. I found myself at a crossroads. Everything I thought I knew was crumbling. The man I loved wasn't the man I thought he was. And no matter how much I wanted to pretend, the truth was too much to ignore. I couldn't stay. The days that followed were a blur of difficult decisions and painful conversations. But there was no turning back. I had to leave. I had to get out. When I told Daniel I was leaving, his face crumpled. He begged me to stay, pleaded with me to believe that he didn't do it. But I couldn't. I couldn't live a lie any longer. The truth was that the man I had married was capable of something far darker than I had ever imagined. And so, with a heavy heart, I packed my things and walked out the door. The life I had built with Daniel was over, but I knew deep down it was the only choice I could make. The truth had set me free, freed me from a lie I didn't even know I was living.